Hey everyone, welcome back to the podcast. Today we are leaving Maria behind, and with me is my co-host.
Just the mere me, Katie, who hasn't been on for the last, like, 5 episodes.
This isn't just Katie though. This is Hacker Katie, who's going to
Oh,
break into
yeah.
the mainframe.
That's right, I'm sorry. My full-time job is hacking the system, and by the system, I mean, like, the system.
The system, yeah, no, we're not talking a specific system. We're talking the specific
The
globally.
system.
All right, so the reason actually Maria isn't here is because of the book we're reading today, which is called Slasher Girls and Monster Boys. And Maria is a wuss, and I've always really wanted to read some horror fiction because I've never really read a lot, but I've always been kind of interested in the idea of, how do you make prose scary when you can just walk away from the book? And Katie also has an interest in horror, right?
Yes.
Unfortunately, that was not super answered by this book because this book is not really that scary, but, we did read it.
Yeah, there was like I said to you, Will and I were discussing earlier, and, there was only one story that made me nervous, or I guess that's a good way of saying it. It did make me nervous because I was like, "What's gonna happen to the main character?" I'm actually kind of invested, and I wanna see something monstrous happen because of the way the plot's going, but the rest of it was kind of just, like, vaguely fan fiction-y, like, where they wanted to fuck the monsters.
Okay, so we should say this is a, anthology book, so it's a bunch of different you guys know what an anthology is. Specifically, each one is kind of essentially almost fan fiction of a different horror movie or story. So, like, one is about, like, The Grudge, where Damien is now, the devil's child and older. There's another one that's
I didn't realize that's who Damien was.
yeah, it's very clever, right?
Oh, that sounds so stupid now that I didn't think about it. I was like, but Damien in general is just a very like, oh, the devil's son name. Like I've
Mhm.
heard it in so many incarnations. It did not occur to me that it was from that.
So I listened to the audiobook version, and in the audiobook version, after each story, they say inspired by this and this film or this and this movie, which you read the hard dead book copy one, and that one they
Yes.
don't. I didn't finish the book because I got really bored about halfway through. So I made it about two-thirds of the way through, and then I was like, I just can't do this anymore.
Aw, shame. Look, it wasn't that bad. It was dry. It was a little dry in some places, only because there's so much of the same theme and so many people followed the same tempo as each other that it became like one long story, but with a whole bunch of short character like versions of it.
I think short stories in general are difficult because you need like a really strong twist or hook to make them work. It's hard to bond with a character in the time that a short story has. And so a lot of these I didn't feel like had a very good twist at the end or like a final like, "Oh my god, the horror of it," you know?
Well, here, let's start with the first one.
Did you write down which ones were which cuz I forgot after a while.
Yeah, I have it in front of me too. Okay, so the very first, so there's several stories in this. There are 15 stories written in this
It would have
anthology.
been better if there had been 13, the cursed number.
Ooh, yeah, no, they didn't go that hard. And a lot of them have females, if not all of them, because I too did not finish it, but not because I did not want to, because I ran out of time and I didn't manage my time well. But the point is here, the first one really sets the tone for the rest of them, honestly. Would you like to give a small little summary of what the first one is?
That's the bird one, right?
So the first one is called The Birds of Azalea Street, and it is by Nova Rensuma.
Okay, so I didn't think this one was that bad. I wasn't super interested in it, but I was like, okay, this is kind of a cool concept. Basically, it's about some neighborhood girls, right, who know there's this pedophile in their neighborhood. And he also has a thing with birds, so he has a bunch of bird feeders and stuff.
And he shoots them and kills them.
Yes, exactly. He's also not that nice to them. And one day they see a woman come into his house that is like his bride or something like that. Or they think she is. And they're like really worried about her. So they're trying to communicate with her to like try to get her to come out. And it ends up that actually she is a bird lady and she pecks the guy to death.
Which I thought was quite sick.
I thought that was cool. Yeah, again, I kind of liked the idea of it, and I thought that the way the girls were written was kind of fun. But
Uh,
the actual thing of it was like, okay.
See, look, I liked everything in that story except for their involvement with Wicca. They pushed that too hard. Like, let me tell you, listeners. So it starts out really, really calm, like just a small little a hint of something more happening than just a weird neighborhood
Yes.
pedo thing happening. The one girl that it's from the perspective of is lives right next door, and so she knows all the girls, and it's like you have this vibe of high school, small pond in a neighborhood, and the next door neighbor is a pedophile, though we don't know that he's acted on it. He says certain breathy things and he carries himself inappropriately with young girls. And none of the parents seem to pick up on it, which I think is a little weird. I feel like the way they wrote him or the way the author wrote him made him so obvious that I felt like it was insane that the parents didn't know, which honestly, that could be a whole aspect to itself. But what got me is she kept shoving in little like Wicca things that the girls would do, like we practiced light as a feather, stiff as a board the other night and did this, and that's cool, I guess, but it felt so forced. Like it felt shoved and stuffed into the story. Like it would go on too long rather than just being a reference in those moments, and it didn't like build a foundation off that idea. So it kind of felt like every now and again she'd stuff some extra information in there and it would not feel right. It would feel uncomfortable. Otherwise, I thought it would just have been cool if the bird lady next door was just a bird lady and she just came along and they witnessed it and they had nothing to do with magic. I felt like that would be even more horrific and awesome.
Yeah, I felt like that aspect was a little too explained. Because here's the thing with horror: I don't like horror when it's explained, and I don't like it when it's too easy to guess what the monster is. Like, that to me makes it lose a lot of the power. And, like, in this case, it was too clear it was a bird lady, like, right from the start. I was like, okay, I see what's going on here. It's going to be a bird taking vengeance. And I was like, I'm not super interested in this. And she's not specifically creepy enough.
No, they didn't frame her as though she could have been mortal, though. Immediately, as soon as they were spying out their window, she came off as like ethereal and like very unknown and everything. And it would have been so much cooler if, because you remember how at the end of the story, the bird lady like was looking at her like, duh, you know who I am, you summoned me type of vibe. And it would have been so much cooler if the bird lady seemed like a normal, like inquisitive little bird, like, hi, like waving to them through the window, and they'd be like, no, don't go in, and then freaking out, and her being like, ha ha ha, and then laughing on his arm and being really young and impish as a bird might, because crows can be very
Yeah.
impish as well, and so can like all of them. So, but instead she's just like moon goddess walking through the night, like, you know what's gonna
Yeah,
happen.
it's a little too expected, and I think that's a
On the beak.
yeah. And then she like pecks the guy to death, which is like it was okay, but it wasn't very atmospheric. And again, I don't know how much of this is like because the other thing is I love horror movies. Like I should have said that at the beginning. I love horror movies, and I even really love bad ones. But I don't quite feel like in prose it works as well. And that's kind of a thing for all of these stories is that I feel like a lot of them were just too conventionally written and this monster was too clear. So the one that I did like more is the next one, which is basically about a girl who goes into the forest and she finds a table set up like Alice in Wonderland.
It is called In the Forest Dark and Deep by Carrie Ryan.
Yeah, and she finds it, and there's also though this Mad Hatter, large bipedal rabbit thing, and then some like bloody stuff happens. So originally she goes in and is just like, he's creepy, but she goes in and she has fun with it. And then what happens is some girls make fun of her, and then the rabbit, kidnaps them, kills them, puts them around the table, and then puppeteers them to have a tea party with her.
Which I thought was pretty sick.
I thought that was dope as fuck. I thought that was really cool. And what's also interesting is that the story switches back and forth from when she's 7 to when she's like 18 or 19.
17.
And I like that aspect of it. I actually originally thought something different was happening than what it was, because at the beginning, she goes to the tea party and it's completely innocent. And then it flashes forward 10 years and she talks about how she has memories of going to the tea party and it was all bloody and the thing
Yeah.
with the girls happened. And I was like, oh, this is fascinating. There's some kind of a disconnect happening between that time period and the future time period and how she perceives it.
Yeah, that was really cool. I thought so too.
And then it ends up that like, no, we just hadn't reached the part in the story where that happened. So that was a
Yeah.
little disappointing, but overall I did find that story really creepy and I did like that aspect of it.
I did find, so even though the author did a really good job of creating a grimy atmosphere. And she kind of did do what you were talking about a little bit, but not in that way. When she's younger, everything starts off as like really playful, imaginary, innocent. This bipedal rabbit's in the background, like, yo, I like to pedo on you by watching you play in this make believe world all the time. I feel like he's probably like a forest spirit that feeds on like belief. And that's the closest belief anyway. And he's feeding off of her different version of the belief of him or something like that. You know, kind of like the whole, what is it called? The Ritual.
Yeah, I don't remember, but yeah.
Oh my god, it's like one of my favorites. But anyway, so I feel like that's what's going on. But anyway, I thought it was interesting that over time, and especially once he captures the girls and strings them up, they start bloating over time and their skin
Oh, that was
cracks and
great.
they're oozing and it's sick and it's gross. And I like the fact that the police are like aghast at all of this, but during that time she was enjoying herself with the corpses.
That's the other thing is she doesn't tell the police right off the bat. She keeps coming back for like 3 or 4 days as they're
Yeah,
just sitting
no.
there dead. I thought that was so cool.
She's so gross. She is sick. She is that's what I loved. She is a sicko. Like she has a hard on for this giant rabbit and she likes playing pretend with corpses. Like
That was pretty cool. That was fun. Yeah, I did like that. And the thing is, the rabbit I actually did find a little creepy in the way that, like, he just doesn't talk. He
yeah,
just kind of follows her, and, like, there's the whole, like... And so then in the second half of the story, what happens is that he sets up a second tea party for her with the people that she doesn't like again. Oh, I forgot a really cool part, which is right before the police find the girls. He actually strings her up the same way. So he sews in a fishing line into her wrists and has her be part of the tea party so that she won't be suspected. And there's some kind of like a reciprocal thing where like she has to be included in what he's doing. So at the end of the story, he cuts off all the heads of the people at the party. You don't see it, but you get the insinuation that that's what's going to happen to her, and she's okay with it because she
is that how it ended?
that's the impression
No,
I
no.
got. Okay.
No, I got the impression that he was making the wounds real again, but she was like, she's in that state of mind where she's like, but maybe they were too real and I'm gonna die this. I don't think she died. I think she came back.
Oh, okay.
I think she came back. It's because there's two ways it could have gone, and the way I read it, or maybe it's somewhere in the middle and you're supposed to read into it however you want. But the way I read into it is that it wasn't overt enough that he was malicious or even non-engaged. He was more engaged, like positively in her regard. He had fondness for her to some degree. It was at least through her vision that we saw of him, but it seemed like he had fondness for her because he wanted to continue the charade and he did all these things for her. So why would he take away a believer?
Oh, that's interesting.
I read it more as like this is like almost like a weirdly sensual business transaction. Not sensual as in sex, but sensual as in like sensual the senses.
Yeah, the senses. That's actually an interesting way of looking at it. Yeah. I would have liked if the author had delved a little bit more
I know.
into that, because it does feel like at the end you're a little bit like, so what? The ending doesn't quite hit as hard as it should.
It doesn't.
Again, I'm not sure how much of that is like this is how short stories are, and I did like this one.
No, I don't agree. I've read some pretty darn good short stories, let me just tell you. But it's really hard. It is hard. It's because you have to show don't tell. But even many, and if there's a lot of plot going on, that's the thing is short stories are way easier just when you magnify one particular aspect of something, so that way you don't have to rely on plot. It's so hard to be able to balance that. But anyway, let us go on. The next one is called Emmeline by Kat Winters.
You go ahead and describe it, because I described the last two.
Emmeline is a succubus ghost who likes to fuck World War II soldiers because she was murdered in her bedroom and now there are soldiers coming in and out and she wants to fuck.
She is DT.
She's very horny. Like that's the whole shtick. Is she like the author paints her as a young woman who always wanted to have that wild romantic life. Like she was a young, dark-featured French girl who liked movies and knew actresses, and it's during World War II, so it's probably like, you know, she wanted fame or glamour or something like that, or something similar, but she really wanted a boy. And now that she's dead because a bomb got dropped off on her or in her bedroom, and the rest of her family's alive except for her father because, well, we'll get to that. Anyway, she's just chilling up there and the rest of her family's like, oh, that fucking ghost Emmeline, we really wish she'd leave. I mean, no, Is that not how they feel? Her sister literally says, you should get out of here. Previously, there was a German soldier that came around and she tried to fucking kill him. And now there's an American soldier around and she's like gentle about it. She wants to have the romantic sex and like have the tryst, but then she wants them to stay with her so she's not alone. So she tries to kill them, as you might imagine, a succubus. But it doesn't work with the German soldier and it doesn't work with this soldier. And so she's alone and she's waiting forever and ever and ever for
A man who will not show up. In the audiobook version, the narrator does a French accent, and I think that's what I liked most about this story was the French accent.
I could see that.
It's not a terrible idea. I feel like the story gets ruined about halfway, though, when she tells him she's a ghost and he doesn't believe her.
I know!
Why would you do that? We, as the reader, now know she's a ghost, so we know the game is up.
But we already knew, too. And so it was like saying like all your relatives hiding in the room ready to say happy birthday to you, and you're sitting there and you're like, oh, I see all these relatives, they're gonna say happy birthday. But instead of them saying happy birthday and then like it all being just a surprise, they jump out. And before they say happy birthday, you get slammed with a happy birthday pie in your face. So, like, that's what that experience was like. You did not need to tell us. You should. It was. I can see tongue in cheek, like if it was a larger novel, how that could have played in. But with it as it was a horrible reveal.
Yeah, I didn't think it was good. I have a thing where I don't like when authors hang on to twists too late because
Yeah.
then they're not able to explore the
Facets of it.
facets of the reveal, right? I felt like this story, though, ruined it because she doesn't explore the facets of it afterward. It's supposed
No.
like she doesn't really go into it any more than like, oh, she's a like she really could have just kept that to the end or actually just kept it ambiguous throughout. I thought that would have been kind of interesting as well.
She started sprinkling hints when she first starts it towards the beginning. Emmeline is sitting in the moonlight, and she describes her feet as being like the glamour stars, super white,
Right,
pearlescent.
yeah.
And I was like, she's a ghost. It's because why is she hanging out in this wreckage of a room in a house while everyone else is downstairs eating? Her mother, her siblings, and these American soldiers are all down there partying. Why is she up there by herself in the cold next to a smoldering heap, and her like ankles are like pearlescent white, and she loves the dalliance of it in this moonlight? I'm like, okay, she's a ghost. So first of all, you didn't need to tell me. Second of all, by the time we get to that point where she's gonna have sex with him, like you're like, you could have like that could have removed that belief for a moment and made it even more of a surprise, because how can a ghost have sex with a man? You don't know. There's no rules set up in this world. So
okay, so this is an interesting question that I think is actually kind of central to the story. She has sex with him, but if she's not there, then where does the physical particulates end up?
I would imagine it's kind of like the concept of multi-reality. Like in any ghost scenario, in my little brain world, I always imagine, oh, if they haven't accounted for it, you can pretend that it's like a mixing of two realities.
The jizz goes to the other reality. It's multi-universal
jizz. Fucking vagina, yeah. Or maybe he didn't come, you don't know.
That is true. That was a very heteronormative thing of me to say.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a very good point. So overall, not my favorite of the bunch. I feel like there could have been something interesting with the whole idea of how much she loves movie stars, and that I feel like there could have been a commentary on something about women in movies at that time.
I think that made it enough, honestly. I think the concept of her comparing and the obsession that she had with that lifestyle already spoke for it. What I would have liked more of is the hatred her sister has come to have for her, or her mother.
That could have been cool, yeah.
She was a well-loved family member, it sounded like. Her sister loved the crap out of her, and now she's like bitterly spitting at her like, get out of here, you don't belong here anymore. But she's hurt. But we don't see any of that except for in like 2 sentences. And God, I would have loved to see more of that. Or instead of the whole like, I don't know, extended scene with her and him talking a whole bunch of stuff, cut some of that out and then have a longer scene with the sister. That would have been cool.
Yeah, I think that would have been really interesting. I think that would have been really cool. So what's the next one?
Verse, Chorus, Verse by Lee Bardugo.
This is another one that I actually quite liked.
Oh, this was my favorite one.
Yeah, break it down for us, Katie.
Okay, so I love it because the world it's in is our world, except for maybe a very specific aspect of it, which is fame. It is essentially, think Hannah Montana. That's essentially what is her name? Kelsey or Kaylee? Let me see real quick. Her name is Kara.
I just thought of her as Taylor Swift, even though Taylor Swift has never had a breakdown like that.
Kara is a young woman. She sounds like she's supposed to be 16, 17, and she's being sent to a rehab facility because she smokes marijuana and drinks underage, because she is essentially a child star where her mother has shoved her into event after event after event after event because her mother doesn't want to be, quote, white trash, unquote. And she thinks by making money with her daughter and such, I mean, it's all like in the back because we get both Kara's perspective and we get her mom's perspective, which I liked. I have thoughts on that, but I did like the two perspectives.
That idea of the mom not wanting to be white trash, and that's one of the reasons she pushes her daughter, I actually really liked that.
I love it.
Pushy moms are often a trope in these kind of like pop star things, and I liked the idea that there was, and I wish it had been explored more, and it really wasn't, which is unfortunate, but it was nice to have what it was. I really liked the idea that maybe she thinks she's doing this because this is the only way she can provide for her daughter. Because she talks about how they were poor at one point and homeless, and I liked the
Oh,
idea that like, yeah, no, maybe I am pushing her, but like this is all I can do for her.
yeah, but it's not right still. One of my favorite scenes in this story is actually not one of the core scenes, not for Kara and the haunting and the horror that happens in the story, but it's when mom has a flashback towards the end of them being in a casino parking lot and how Kara's father was like always so drunk and out of like all up and down all over the place, and how he and she got into like this whole thing in a parking lot with all these like gross other, quote, white trash people watching them as they had a family breakdown and cops arrived. And it's because her husband can't seem to keep like his liquor in control, and like they're like over sunburned, they're wearing tank tops and flip-flops, and she just feels so embarrassed and so gross and brought down because she feels like these gross people are judging her, and she feels she could be better than that. And she's meanwhile in this casino with this really crappy husband partner with her daughter in the car crying, and it's just like she's not successful at all, and she never wants to go back to being that person. So she like makes Kara do all these really horrible things to the point where there's been molestation to her daughter and
Mhm.
she's overlooked it so that way they can get beyond where they were at. And that's a real story over and over and over again, and I like that in this. And then I love the added part where she's in the rehab center and there's a freaking demon or something there eating like up souls. That's sick.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. I liked the how the rehab center. I liked how that was like she was trapped in there with whatever the monster thing was. And I liked at the beginning that you're not actually quite sure what is going on. Unfortunately, it
Yeah.
gets kind of explained at the end that it's like a ghost thing. But like really liked early on where you're not quite sure what's going on. One of the maids is, or not the maids, the nurse is described as kind of like porcine and grubby, and I was like, oh, this is cool. This is interesting. I don't know what this is.
And Kara had never seen a nurse with dirt under her fingernails, and I really liked that. That she'd been in hospitals enough to know, clever enough to pick it out, and finally that it was even happening. So that was such a cool scene.
Yeah, I thought that was really interesting. I feel like the monster could have been tied in more with that idea we were talking about of the mother ignoring all the bad things that are
Oh, I
happening.
know.
But overall, I really did like this story. It did feel a little creepy at times, which,
It did.
a lot of them didn't to me. And
I just didn't like the ending because it was too heavy-handed.
in the hospital, they told Kara to get in a bathtub, and that was like the last thing the demon needed her to do.
But I think that's so weird. Why?
I think it ties back to when the big moment she became famous was when she
No,
got
but
molested
yeah, but
in the
what? Like,
bathroom.
I see, there's not enough habitual act happening with the monster for me to understand enough about it for it to be scary. At this point, it's just random action for me.
It seemed like vaguely slut shamey, and that was it.
Yeah.
Like, yeah, no, I agree. It was like there wasn't quite enough there. I felt like the story cut off right as we began to get into the weird stuff the
Yes.
monster could do, and it
Well,
was
maybe
like
it's a longer piece.
maybe I don't know. Leah Bardugo is the one I think who does the Shadow and Bone series, which is funny because for some reason I just assumed she wasn't a good writer, and I don't know why. Maybe because her books are just popular, but like actually she was very good. I really liked it. There was a very good sense of character in it. This was probably my favorite of the bunch. This one and the Alice in Wonderland, and then one more we'll talk about. I liked, but almost all of the others blurred together. So what was number 4?
Hide and Seek by Megan Shepherd. And that was the one with the Appalachian folktale.
This is the one where there's an Appalachian folktale about some crow guy that shows up as a representative of death.
His name is Crow Cullum.
Crow Cullum, and it's basically that you can avoid your death by playing a game with death. And if you win, you get to live. And if you don't, you gotta die. The whole thing is she decides to play hide and seek with death. And I did not find it super interesting. This is also, by the way, the like second time that like the evil monster has been like a sexy guy. And I was like, okay, let's do a little bit more with this concept.
Okay, hold on a sec. Crow Cullum's not supposed to be the bad guy. He's literally the avatar that represents death, and death is a whole thing on its own. He's like literally some dude that committed suicide earlier on. I think it's what the story was. Somehow he got hoisted into the service of death type of thing.
The thing is, the story is not scary because it's basically like Death tries to kill her with like a rattlesnake and a fire, and it's like random stuff like that. Kind of what's that one series called? Final Destination, where it's just random acts. I didn't really find the story interesting on almost any level. It's just
It wasn't interesting.
yeah. Okay, so what's the next one?
The Dark, Scary Parts and All. Danielle Page. And that's the one with the Damien.
Oh, okay.
I did not realize that Damien Thorne was Damien
From The Grudge.
the Grudge.
Not The Grudge, sorry, The Omen. I thought this one was like a little bit clever in that like I didn't pick up that it was Damien from The Omen until later. And there's a little bit at the end where it's like, oh, all of his neighbors are now in on the cult. At the end, it's like, okay, pretty much everyone is in on this except main girl, the main character.
Oh, really? Is that what happens? I didn't finish it all the way through.
Yeah, so basically what happens is there's a girl who writes a poem about how Frankenstein is the real victim. And Damien
No,
is
not
like,
a poem. She didn't write a poem. She wrote
Okay.
a research paper on it, okay?
an essay. And then Damien is like, this bitch, I'm gonna make her my wife. And then the story is basically like her getting bullied and him being like, hey, you should kill the bully. And she's like, maybe not. And then at the end, he brings her to his house where he's like, here's the bully, now kill her. The main girl is like, nah. That's pretty much the story. And then at the end, you're like, oh, okay, maybe she is going to kill the bully. So here's the thing with this. I've always felt like when The Omen ends, you're stopping at the most interesting part, which is like, how does this devil child get raised? What happens with the apocalypse? How does that work? And I think the story actually would have been so much more interesting from Damien's point of view. Because that kind of weird, twisted psychology of the devil child, to me, is actually pretty interesting. It's like that movie that came out a little bit ago called Bright, I think, or Shining or something like that, about Superman, but what if he was an evil child?
Yes. What was it called? It wasn't called that.
Glint or something like that.
Yeah, I didn't like that movie. It was awful, but I liked the concept of it.
I liked the concept because the concept of how growing up, if you are all powerful, how does that change your psychology? And the movie answers it with, you're just a crazy person like half the time, which I think is a boring answer.
Yes.
And not psychologically interesting. I would have liked to see something like that in this book, in this story, where it was more about like, what does growing up evil look like on the inside? But that's not really the story. The story is like a little bit creepy towards the end, but not really.
It's a Beauty and the Beast story.
Yeah, but also the Beast is like just an evil guy.
No. He's not even evil. He's a sexy underworld man. Like, that's literally the vibe he gives off, is those dating simulators that you have from Japan that you play.
So
And
totally
he's the one that you can't get unless you unlock the special one, because he's goth, and the goth ones are always, or the super evil ones or whatever, or crazy ones are the ones you have to unlock with special dialogue options, or you have to romance somebody just a certain way or something like that. That's exactly what this like feels like.
That is 1,000% what he is, and that's what it felt like. And that's the thing is, I really love the dynamic of the girl hooking up with the monster. You know what I mean? That dynamic.
Yeah, of course.
But this book tries to do that a lot, and it never quite feels authentic or
well, there's
cool.
no real connection between the male and female character or whatever's happening.
And also, often he isn't actually that monstrous. Like, the only one that I felt like...
The bunny one.
The bunny... I was about to say that. The bunny one. Where it's like, no, he really is some kind of weird bunny creature. That I liked. But, so this one, I don't really have anything interesting to say. I didn't think it was that good.
It was enough that I wanted to know what happened. But I'm not fond of it, no. The only one I'm fond of, really, is the ghost one. And like I said, the bathtub,
The Taylor Swift one? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I feel like that was supposed to be longer, but it had to be cut for the anthology. I have that weird vibe to it.
Yeah, I think that makes sense in that it would have been better if it was just a little bit longer. We'll probably start skipping through some of these because at a certain point, some of them just aren't good and there's not a lot to say about them if they're not good.
So for me, the ones that come after that is The Flicker, The Fingers, The Beat, The Sigh by April Genevieve Tuchulok. We have Fat Girl with a Knife by Jonathan Maybury.
Okay, so the only other one that really sticks in my memory and I liked, but I still felt was kind of insubstantial, was the one where, and you can help me with the name or whatever, but it's basically what is that called? I Know What You Did Last Summer. It's basically that story, but told in a more creepy ghost
The
way.
drunk driving one?
Yeah.
That's the next one. The Flicker, The Fingers, The Beat, The Sigh.
Basically, it's about a character who's in high school and he's driving with his girlfriend and his sister and her boyfriend. And the driver's kind of drunk, his girlfriend, and they hit a weird girl and she died from it. And the whole thing is told as they try to hide her body exactly in like what you did last summer. But he also is having flashbacks to the connection he had with her and how they dated a little bit and how they made out. I did like the kind of back and forth where there isn't clear delineations between each time period. They start kind of melding together a little bit in a very sort of mildly poetic way, which I liked. So I liked how it was written, but the actual plot itself doesn't go anywhere interesting. Well, I liked how it was written, but it didn't really go anywhere. And I feel like that's an issue with a lot of these, which is if you are telling fan fiction, which is essentially what these are. They're retellings and light fan fiction of a horror movie or a horror story. Then you need to. So, fan fiction itself, a lot of times what they're doing is you're already attached to the characters, so they don't necessarily need to work super hard at getting you to like them. But in this case, you don't really care about the characters anyway because they're not exactly the same characters, and a lot of times horror movies aren't like you don't ship characters in a horror movie anyway. So you need to come at this from the perspective of the reader already knows the story. So what are you adding? What's the new perspective? What are you saying about the movie through this story? How do you play with expectations? Almost none of these actually do that. Almost all of these are like, this is kind of what the perspective of one of the characters in the story would have. That to me just wasn't super interesting or really well done.
I was just reading the story thing, one you were just talking about, and
Mhm.
that ended on such a depressing, lame. It was like a fart.
That's the other issue is that like none of these have a very good Twilight Zone ending where you're left with like the horror of this twist. A lot of these just end with like, and then it was kind of a little creepy.
I feel a lot of inspiration. I fair enough with what I know what you did last summer. That's exactly what it is. But it also gave me a weird vibe at the end from The Lovely Bones. Did you ever read it?
No, I never read that.
The Lovely Bones ends on the most haunting, depressing, sad, true in every situation note. Do you know the premise for it?
It's a girl who died and then no, I don't.
Fair enough. It's a girl who was not only died, she was kidnapped, raped, and then cut into pieces. And I know. And it was on our summer reading list for high school. She was thrown into a mud pit. And her body's never found, I don't think, if I remember correctly. What the story is she's a ghost, and it's from her perspective watching her family and friends decay from her loss and then overcome her loss and then find the killer. And at the end, it's so sad because she's still dead. You still have 3 more chapters to go once like the plot ends, and it just explains how time passes and how she misses out on kids and all these
That's
things.
so depressing.
I know. And then it ends on, let's see if I can find it real quick. I'm sorry. Let's see if I can just find a quote. Okay, here we go. So it ends on a scene of a random couple that's living in a small house next to the mud pit where her body was taken. One of the key imagery pieces in the book and movie is her charm bracelet, which represents different people in her life. And so there's this one part. And in a small house 5 miles away was a man who held my mud encrusted charm bracelet out to his wife. Look what I found at the old industrial park, he said. A construction guy said they were bulldozing the whole lot. They're afraid of more sinkholes like that one that swallowed the cars. His wife poured him some water from the sink as he fingered the tiny bike and the ballet shoe, the flower basket and the thimble. He held out the muddy bracelet as she set down the glasses. This little girl's grown up by now, she said. Almost. Not quite. I wish you all a long and happy life.
That's so depressing.
I love it. It's one of my favorite book endings ever.
Yeah, no, it makes sense. It's haunting.
It's beautiful. It's so sad. It's so sad.
See, and I think the thing is you can't do that quite in a short story. Like, you can't quite get to that depth.
I think you can, absolutely. It depends what you decide to include, and I don't know how to do it, like, per se. I've never created actually, that's not true. I have created one short story that I think ends perfectly. Only one, and it's one I don't care about at all, that I've never shared with much people. I think less is more, and I think the less you use, just like she did in that ending part, the last paragraph isn't about her or any other characters or anything like that. It went into a bigger sense of what life was like, how, like, it's like two old people in this different situation looking back on this thing from this artifact from this other time, and it's just showing a situation that represents a larger part of life. And if you're able to bring perspective like that into your reader in a short story, whether it's closer into an issue or farther out of an issue where you can touch them in that way, then you're going to make that impact. But I can't say how you're supposed to do that. I don't think there's a rule that you have to follow to get that done.
That's what's interesting is I wanted to read these to see more of like how to do that in the horror genre, and like these did not answer it. So dear listeners, if you have any suggestions of horror we should read or short story horror that we should read, leave it in the comments below and help the algorithm out on YouTube.
Yes, that would be really nice, actually. I wouldn't mind that. It's because I'd like some off the beaten track ones, because I've read what is it? Snow White Blood Red. Those have a couple of okay ones, but they're not that great.
I read one that was by Neil Gaiman, which was pretty creepy. It's Snow Glass Apples. It's about like if Snow White was like kind of a vampire and the prince was into necrophilia, and it's told from this
Oh,
part of her stepmother, and that was like creepy, but also Neil Gaiman is at the top of his craft. Like, you know what I mean? Like, nobody does that better than him.
I
So
know. I wish I read the rest of them. Well, I will, but not in time for everyone to hear my opinion on it.
I really, again, I only got about halfway through it because I was like, these are getting really kind of boring or repetitive. So there might have been some better ones later on, but I don't think as a whole, if you like horror, I don't know. I have trouble telling whether recommending books or not, because it really just depends. If you can get through these stories pretty quickly and you just kind of want to see, some fairly well written pseudo fan fiction of horror
It's not a
movies.
waste of money at all, no way, but it's just nothing that's gonna, at least so far from what I read, nothing's that's gonna you're gonna be like, "Wow, this is my favorite book ever."
It's nothing really thought-provoking, I think, and that's
No,
or
exactly.
emotion-inducing. I think that's probably the biggest problem with the book. So,
I would
yeah,
agree.
again, if you guys have any suggestions for horror that that you think works really well, I'd love to. I really do wanna look at more horror books, maybe try something. I don't wanna try Stephen King. I know everybody loves Stephen
I
King,
don't
but,
wanna
like,
read him either, I'm over him right now. I know
yeah.
he's really good, but I really wanted to read a couple of the books that you sent me, like the Lockdown one.
Yeah, I think we should read those. Yeah, there's a couple of those I still wanna read. Yeah, let us know if you have any reading suggestions, and, until next time, this is
Oh, that was such a lame sign off. No, do a different one.
my favorite sign off is good luck and good night.
That's an awful sign off.
That's a
You know,
great one. Good
I
luck
love
and good night.
last podcast on the left. They're just like, "Hail Satan, hail yourself, magustalations." All right, everyone, have a good night.
Okay, that's what we're leaving as the sign off. Bye.
No, we can't copy them.
Too late.
Okay, so what you should do is you should be like,
What is this, an ASMR podcast?
and thank you so much, listeners, for listening to our lovely tales this evening on horror, femininity, and fucking monstrous men. We hope you have a wonderful evening. For now, this is Katie.
And remember, there's always something dark around the corner. All right, that's good.